My name is Helka Silventoinen, and I'm a couple and sexual therapist and also a cultural interpreter. Most of my patients are foreigners or multicultural couples, and I do most of my work in English. So here I am to speak of the number one challenge that I feel that my couples have in their couple relationship, and that is about communication. A few months back, I found a book that had this statement on it. It's a lifelong journey to speak so that the other wants to hear, and to listen so that the other wants to speak. This sentence really went deep down for myself. I work with people in therapy, and in therapy I'm quite a good listener. But in my own couple relationship, which is already quite old, I know I'm a better talker than I am a listener. So when we think of life, nothing but difference is as rich. It's a rich thing. It's a good thing that we are so different. And it's also very challenging. Wherever we come from, whatever language area, whatever culture, whatever country, whatever religion, we're all different. We're different even if we are from the same family, a brother and a sister, or two sisters or two brothers. Our personalities are different. Our gender difference is noticeable, and we know that men and women are generally quite different. Our behavioral styles are different, no matter if we come from the same culture, same family, or wherever. Sometimes it's hard to even understand oneself, let alone try to explain what I mean to the other. And remember, as we go on, you do have the possibility of asking questions. So write down your questions and I will answer them after the lecture. So then we will begin with speaking. Language is culture. It's said that language is culture within a culture. In Finland, I find that many multicultural couples speak either English, Spanish, French, languages like that, maybe even Swedish more than they choose to speak Finnish as a family and as a couple relationship language. This is an old language. This is an ancient language, and it's said to be the third hardest language to learn. So many multicultural couples choose a third language where neither is speaking their mother tongue, or then if it's one of the general mother tongues like English or Spanish or French or whatever, they might speak that language. And like we all agree, each should speak their own mother tongue to their children. Here's the tone of voice that I wrote the first thing to take into consideration. There's a lot to say about the tone of voice. We have languages in the world that the tone is so important that if you say the wrong tone, you change the meaning completely. I'm a TTK, a third culture kid. My parents worked in Taiwan when I was growing up. So as a child, I learned Taiwanese or Hokkien or Fujian, whatever you want to call it, and also Mandarin Chinese. Those are both languages that tones are really important in. But oftentimes, tone of voice is also used to express the feeling or the deeper meaning of words and of a language. And one thing that is we talk about often with with my patients and my multicultural people is politeness. And sometimes it's really hard for us Finns to be polite because we don't have those words. And so they might be a challenge, the tone of voice. Then there's another thing. When we state opinions, we have cultures where the language is full of opinions and full of so-called arguing. Exchanging opinions is what we like to do. And in Finland also. And then there are cultures I have seen that love to argue. So arguing is fun, where for the other it may be hurtful, it may be fearsome, because you don't want to fight. To argue about opinions seems like fighting to some. Then I have written interrupt or converse. When we talk in different languages, we talk in different tempo. If you look at the typical Finnish that speaks slower, they talk and pause, and then after a pause, the other answers. Most other languages, and also the Eastern Finnish languages, Karjala or Savo, they talk on top of each other. The language and the talking just changes without a pause. That often feels like interruption to the ones speaking more slow. There's also words like dialogue, conversing, and it could be very, very different. We're not really talking, we're just interrupting, might someone say. So there's a difference in that side of speaking also. Then there's the body language, the gestures and the expressions. Sometimes, I'm sure if you watch Finnish television, you wonder how still people sit, how their hands don't move, how their facial expressions change very little. There are many countries where especially women's faces are covered partly so that you cannot see the expressions. But those expressions are there. As I said before, they can be heard in the voice, but they can also be seen on the face. There's a world-known conductor called Esa-Pekka Salonen who once said well about the Finnish culture. He said, Finns speak in the nuances of silence. There's very little gestures needed when you speak Finnish. This culture within a culture is a lot about the words. Whatever is said, it's said. It doesn't really need all those expressions. But then there are many other cultures where the expressions actually express more than just the words. I want to tell you an example from my childhood when we went to my grandmother's house on our furlough from coming from Asia. And I remembered as soon as we sat down at the coffee table, there were many people and we were making a little bit of noise with the children. She never said anything. All she said was, and we knew that's not allowed what we're doing. So it was just a and we knew. Passive and passionate speaking looks very different. And passive does not mean that there is not passion inside. And passion does not mean that they're actually very active in about understanding and trying to get the meaning across. One thing I would like to talk about in speaking is indirect communication, where we say questions like, why is that cup still on the table? Or, we haven't had sex for a week. These are indirect questions that are harder to understand and harder to cope with than direct questions. Please take that cup away. I have already washed the dishes. Or I'm going to wash the dishes. Please bring your dishes here. Or I would like to have sex with you. Is it okay? Then we'll go on. I have made a checklist for speaking. What I have noticed many times as we speak English or some other language together that neither of us is that familiar, we're not born into that language, that oftentimes we might understand a simple word differently. Do we use the word we use, meaning the same? I remember this one time when a couple where the woman was Finnish and the man was from southern parts of Europe were using the word frown. He frowned on his wife's bag that was left in the middle of the hallway coming into the home. He said, "I frown on that bag." For the Finnish woman, frown meant an angry expression. And so we got to talking. And he actually meant that it irritated him a little bit. It was in the way that, and he wasn't angry at the bag. He just wanted something done with it, so it wouldn't always be there. Or we talk about tidiness and cleanliness. The Finnish women are actually known to be very clean and very tidy. Well, that's a stereotype, and that does not seem to be so true. Because when we have men come into the Finnish homes, lots of them talk about this. This is one of the topics we talk about many, many times in therapy. What does tidy mean? And what does clean mean? To those people coming from hot countries, tidiness means that things are not all over. There's not many things. Because the more things you have, the more dirt and more dust accumulates. And to be clean means sterile. To the Finnish, it means that it's clean, maybe dust and vacuumed, and maybe washing the floor every once in a while. Tidiness means that the things are put away. They're in their places. So oftentimes we have this talk about, is something clean enough? And this has a lot to do with culture. Words have a lot to do with culture. It does not need to be sterile as in the hospital, but it needs to be clean when you live in a cold country like ours, etc., etc. So do we use the word meaning the same? That would be a good thing to check out. And then do we understand each other's conversation culture, or are we just using the culture that we have been raised up in? For example, the tone of voice and talking about things with a lot of passion, a lot of noise, sounds like you're arguing all the time. This is what we talk about a lot too. There are tempo differences, and to remember, if your spouse is slow, to rush a slow person means to slow them down. The meaning of silence is one thing. As I mentioned that lots of Finns speak with silence also. There's a big difference in Finland also with the East and the West. We know that the Karelians, for example, speak a lot. And they have a lot of fun and a lot of laughter. Whereas when you go to places like near Pori or somewhere, the people are more subtle. Then there are gestures that some places are used, some places are not, and just showing of your hand, those things may mean different. Make sure that you understand the other's conversation culture. And sometimes gestures are meant to emphasize what is behind the words and emphasize the feeling. Then there's argument and fight. What I think is important, that you choose your battles, that you fight about things that are worthwhile, that you fight on the same side against something that is trying to pull you apart, that you stand on the same side of the fence and have a common enemy. It could be time, it could be work, it could be the kids, it could be the in-laws, it could be money. Anything that is tearing you apart is worth fighting about. Often we fight about things and argue about things that are not really the things we'd like to say. And that's often because we don't dare, or we don't know how to express what I really need, what I really want. So sometimes it's good to give that enemy a name. That bag I was talking to you about a little while ago, that bag was named Amelia. So all he would have to say later is, I put Amelia where she belongs, or do you need Amelia now? And she would go and put the bag away, to make it a little bit lighter so you don't have to fight all the time. It's important to argue long enough that you either agree or agree to disagree. Then let's go to listening. And I must say, this is my harder lesson. The goal of listening is to understand. My goal, what you mean, your goal when you speak, is to be understood. The only thing that really matters is, when I listen, is that I know for a fact what you mean. That I don't assume, that I don't interpret, that I make sure that whatever you say, I understand. And whatever you mean, I understand what you mean. It's really important for us to listen to the emotions and listen to the message behind the words. Sometimes we get stuck on words. I'll tell you an example from mine and my husband's relationship. He is a very quick person to anger, and even more quick to ask for forgiveness. I get stuck on words. So he comes and he says, I'm sorry for what I said. And I said, well, so am I. So what? Well, I would like to ask you to forgive me. I say, go ahead. Have you heard of anything as mean as that? And this is a true story. Happened several years ago, and I understood that is not building a relationship. That is tearing it down. So don't get stuck on words, but listen to the message behind the words and to the meaning behind the words. Oftentimes I listen and hear that people are blaming each other for talking about things that do not matter. Yes, it is more men who feel like women talk about things that are just not important at all. But do you really think, have you ever really spoken yourself about something that you don't think is worth speaking about? If someone wants to speak to you about something that you're not interested in, and you love that person, I suggest you listen to them because you care. Because probably they're interested in that subject, so listen to them. And listen to the emotions. What is interesting is that if we feel that our emotions are accepted, we feel that we are accepted. If we feel that our emotions are heard, we feel I am heard. So how do we listen? I wrote down with little hearts: be loving, accepting, humble, and considerate. All these words are hard to know what they really mean to the other. So here is another conversation topic that you can talk about. How do you feel loved? What means listening to you in the way that it feels loving to you? Do I need you to look at me in the eye? Do we need a special place? What is the situation? How do you feel accepted? What does it mean to be humble? What does it mean to be considerate? One thing that I've been working on a lot is, let's say my husband comes home and he said he's really frustrated with his work because again so-and-so had not done what they had promised. So instead of listening to his emotion, humbly, lovingly, acceptingly, and considerately, I try to solve. Why don't you tell them this and that and that? He knows what to do. He just wants to be listened to. He wants me to hear his emotion. So I could say things like, I'm sorry to hear that. That's really hard. You must be tired. Tell me more. Accepting and using empathy. That's how we can listen to the other's emotion. I've made a do not list for listening. Because oftentimes listening is interrupted or listening just doesn't work. And here are a few tips on what might be the cause. Do not interrupt. Interrupting does not mean that you cannot ask about something. What do you mean? I didn't hear that. Would you repeat that? Do you mean this and that? That's not interrupting. That's active listening. Actively wanting to know what the other really means. Do not do something else. You know how good we women especially are at cleaning the table or washing the dishes while someone is talking to us. Yes, we do hear, but the other might not feel that he or she is listened to. Do not know what will be said. Here we go again. I know exactly what my husband is going to talk about again. I know exactly what he's going to say. Am I sure? What if he wants to say something different? What if he has found something different about the topic I don't want to listen to? That is hard for me or boring. So it's really important that I listen to what the other is saying. Do not defend yourself until you're sure you're being blamed. Many men say that I'm being criticized, I'm being blamed. I don't even know how to change the diaper of my baby. Are you sure you're being blamed? Or maybe you're being guided or taught something. Listen humbly here too. There might be something that you already know. It might be something that is a good hint for you to learn something new about. Do not refuse to hear or answer. If you feel that something is talked about that you don't have time to listen to now, or you don't want to talk about now, or that you're being blamed, then you can just say, listen, can we talk about this later? It's not fair to the other. If they talk, you pretend to listen, and you actually are not. I found a good aphorism that I would like to show to you. We don't have it pictured yet, but this says, before you assume, before you judge, before you hurt someone, and before you speak. And then there are the ones. Before you assume, know the facts. Don't assume that you're being blamed. Don't assume that this is the same thing again. Don't assume that, yeah, he means that, or she means that, and it's actually you don't know the facts. Before you judge, understand why. It's really important to understand. Make sure you understand, and that you understand why the other is speaking about this, and why does he feel or she feel the way he or she does. Before you hurt someone, feel. Put your feelings into that. Don't lash back without feeling yourself. And when you want to say something, if it hurts you, tell the other about the hurt. Tell the other about your feelings and not blaming them. And the last one, before you speak, think. People have the knowledge and the capability of thinking before they act. That's probably something that is quite different from the rest of the creation. We often assume and we interrupt our thoughts by knowing what has been said instead of listening. So let's think before we speak. And let's especially look at ourselves. Go to the mirror and look at yourself. How do you listen? How do you speak? We started with this. Yes, it's a lifelong journey. It takes forever and will never be perfect. To speak so that the other wants to hear, that the other wants to know what I think, the other wants to listen to what I say, the other wants to listen to me lovingly, calmly, considerately, understandingly. So that I speak so that the other feels loved when I speak. A loved person likes to listen. And it's a lifelong journey to listen so that the other wants to speak. How do I listen? Do I assume that I know what's being said? Or do I want to learn more about the other one, the one I love? Do I want to understand? Do I give him or her the space to listen to me? Do I listen attentively, or do I listen to interrupt? Do I listen to him the way he wants to be listened to? Or do I listen because, whatever, he's talking about stupid things and I'm so bored and I wouldn't want to, but, or does he know that I love him and I want to know about him and I want to listen to him? So let's speak. and listen lovingly, considerately. Thank you.